We're in the dyno room. We've got a VK Commodore, Holden Commodore 1985. It's a local Australian vehicle for those international people that may not know what a Holden is. It's here for a checkup. It's been recently purchased. It's actually not a bad idea when you've got a high performance vehicle, you've just purchased it. It's nice to go over things and make sure that everything's okay before you're going to give it a hard time. It's also good for peace of mind as well and to establish some baselines. There's also minor complaints about some flat spots, etc. So we're going to run it on the dyno to see what we can find and then come up with some fixes. Okay, a little bit of info about the engine and the car. It is a 308 Holden engine that's been stroked to 355 cubic inches. It's got some conrods inside, main stud kit. It's got higher compression than standard. We're thinking it's somewhere around 10.5, 11 to 1, thereabouts. It's got some roller rockers, and it's got a brawler carburetor that we're going to look at today. Let's zoom in and take a close look. Okay, this vehicle has a brawler carburetor. It's got electric choke and also vacuum secondaries. So just clarifying what vacuum secondaries is the secondary barrel is controlled by the carburetor, so it's not directly controlled by your foot and the throttle cable. So secondary barrel opens as the airflow through the primary barrel reaches a point where it needs the secondary barrel, and automatically opens the butterflies in the secondary barrel. So this engine would have typically 4 butterflies, 2 on the primary, 2 on the secondary, and the secondary opens with a vacuum actuator when the carburetor's got enough airflow through it. Okay, we are on the dyno, so I'm going to take you guys through what I do and what I look at when I'm running the car. So to the vehicle, I've got 2 things hooked up. I've got the manifold vacuum, so I can see how much vacuum the engine's pulling, which somewhat correlates to how much throttle input I've got on the engine. So as I open the throttle, the vacuum drops. So 0 vacuum's roughly full throttle, and then at the moment she's pulling about 13-14 inches of mercury, so that's closed throttle. Again, these are just rough numbers, so starting say about -15 to 0 is where I'm going 0 throttle to full throttle. The other thing I've got hooked on the car is air-fuel ratio, so I'm recording that, seeing what the mixtures are, and also I've got the dyno data so I can see power, torque, etc. So let's get rolling. I've got the dyno set, so it's set to 70 k's an hour, so when I get to 70 k's an hour, regardless of how much pedal I've got, it is going to keep me there. So we're in 4th gear now, it's manual transmission. I'm doing about 70 k's an hour. The engine's doing about 2000 RPM. At the moment I've got 16 inches of mercury vacuum, so I've got very little throttle. So I'm only doing about 10-12 horsepower at the moment, so this is our sort of cruising load where I'm neither accelerating on the street nor decelerating, I'm just maintaining speed. If I look at this now, the engine at this point is 15.5 to 1 air-fuel ratio. So it is leaner than I was expecting, and I can also feel in the engine that it is not smooth. It's just this tiny hesitation and surging going on here. Okay? So I'm going to get on the accelerator a little bit more and just see what the mixers do and see how the engine feels. Now the dyno is keeping me at 70 k's an hour, which is about 2000 RPM. So let's do this. Okay, what I've done is I've put a bit more throttle in, so engine got to about 30 horsepower. Then I've got to about 60 horsepower, which is probably about 25% throttle at that point on this big carburetor. So the mixers did richen up a little bit and the engine did feel smoother. Okay? So where I am now, carburetor's settled itself. I don't have that surging going on anymore, although I'm back to that point where it was surging a bit. So So it seems okay at this point, so I'm going to roll into it with a bit more throttle, see what happens. Okay, so what I felt there was engine felt smooth as I came on. It didn't quite have rich enough mixture, and I could feel it in the engine. Although it wasn't too bad, it's only off by a few points. So what it's done there is, as I rolled on, it got nicer and nicer. And then when my foot was all the way down, it didn't quite feel the nicest, but it wasn't complaining, it wasn't too bad. So that was done at 2,000 RPM. So at that point, so I'm going to raise the engine to about 2,500, 3,000, repeat the same process. Is accurate on this one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Now water temps about 190 to 200. Maybe I might give it a little bit of a rest, because you've got to be careful keeping constant load on the engine. Because one thing to keep in mind on the dyno is, although we've got a fan in front of it, the fan only blows at maybe 60 k an hour equivalent of airflow into the radiator. And on the road obviously gets more airflow than that. I might kick the fan into high speed. You flick that switch for me on the side of the fan, please. Yep, thank you. Okay, so we'll just wait for the engine to cool down a bit. I'm about 200 degrees. Again, I'm not concerned at this temperature and where it's sitting, but I've got to keep an eye on it. And my oil pressure's sitting around 20 psi as well at idle. The other thing to keep in mind is, if your oil pressure is really low at idle, you might have the oil a little bit too hot, because as the oil gets hotter, it thins out and the pressure drops. So these are things that I always keep an eye on when we're running. So before I've started this run as well, I did quickly check ignition timing. I wanted to make sure that it was somewhere near right. At 4,000 RPM, seems to be somewhere around 28 degrees, so it is sort of safe-ish starting point. So I've left that alone, so I'm going to see how we go. Okay, while we're sitting here idling, a couple of other observations. Idle mixtures do seem a little bit rich. I'd like to try leaner mixtures to see how the engine responds. Now, one thing when tuning to keep in mind is, just because the analyzers say it's a bit rich, it doesn't mean it's wrong for the engine, because some engines, they do like it rich. If you go to lean them off, they don't idle as nice. So you've got to arrive at a compromise that's going to be right for the engine. You can't just blindly follow target fuel mixtures and adjust things there. It may lead to the car running, I guess following the textbook examples of mixtures, but a car that doesn't run nice. Again, the goal here is to get a car that's pleasant to drive and it runs nice. So the next thing I would like to try after this run is go on, turn in the fuel mixture screws a little bit to take some fuel out of it, see if it still sounds just as smooth and nice. If it does, it means that okay, we've made the right changes, and now we're putting less fuel through the engine, so less fuel wastage and less unburnt fuel as well, which is going to be nicer for the engine overall. Okay, so the temperature has dropped down, so by about 10 Fahrenheit, so I might give it another run. This time I'm at 90 k an hour and repeating the same process. Okay, I've just rolled on from 3,000 RPM, and although I can't fully feel the complaint of that hesitation that the owner was describing, I can see where it might lead to. My mixtures weren't rich enough as I was rolling on. So once I got to full throttle, it was okay, but about mid-throttle, no, I would have liked a bit more fuel in the engine. So I might actually increase the main jet size on the primary barrel, because I'm still driving on the primary at that point where I'm observing that condition. So I would like to maybe go up at least one, maybe two, maybe three sizes in jets to see how it responds. Again, I'm not talking like a big increase or a big change there, because it's not like the car's surging or complaining where the tune-up's way off. It's just that it's not perfect, and if we can address all these things, we're going to end up with a car that drives nicer. Okay, we're ready for a power run. I've set the dyno up so that we're going to start the run somewhere around 2,500. For this first run, I'm only going to go to about 5,500, just under 6 perhaps, just to feel the vehicle and see how it goes, and see what we find. If we're happy there, we might take it a bit further next run. So let's go. Alright, I've ended up about 5,800 on that run, and the engine did make peak power probably around 5,500. We were 262 horsepower at the back wheels, and my fuel mixtures under full throttle looked okay. So I don't think there's an adjustment needed for total mixtures. I'm around 12.7, 12.8 to 1 once I'm at full throttle. But what I would like to do perhaps is add a bit more fuel on the primary barrel and then take a bit out of the secondary barrel, so that way my total remains the same, but my balance of where the fuel comes from is adjusted to get it just a bit smoother when I'm driving it on the primary barrel. So let's go and do another power run, but this time we'll put the camera on the outside of the vehicle. Let's take a look at the dyno run now. So here's our 262 horsepower peak. This is what our power curve looks like. So in here I've got RPM with going from 2000 RPM to 7000 RPM, and on this axis here we've got horsepower from 0 to 350. Now on the right hand side I've got high speed air fuel ratio. So we're expecting this engine to run somewhere between 12 and 13 to 1. So if we look at it, yep, it's somewhere around there for the run. And then you can see here there's this little hump in the fuel mixture there. This is where the secondary butterflies are opening up, and this is probably the hesitation that the driver can feel that he was talking about. And if we look at this point here as well, I don't know if you can notice it in the power curve, but there's a slight dip here in the power instead of it coming up straight up. So where the mixtures are weakening here to nearly 14 to 1, there's this slight drop in power there, but it's, again, it is minor, but after all it is there, and we can see it, and we can, now that we've taken measurements and we know what we're dealing with, we can do something about it. Okay, so the engine again peaked somewhere around here, which is 5.2, 5.5. Okay, so not a bad looking curve. Based on the specs and what the engine was, I guess we were all hoping for a little bit higher than this, but this is what we've got to work with. And we're looking at ways how we can improve. And this is one good thing about bringing the car in for a checkup, because you get to see where you can improve the car, whether it's running right, and what are some of the things that can be done easily to get more out of the vehicle. So next thing we're going to try is perhaps a little bit more ignition timing and see how the engine reacts. I wanted to bring something else into the discussion as well. I was measuring manifold vacuum on this car, and this is the manifold vacuum now on the right hand axis of the dyno graph. So in here I can see that we're nearly pulling half a psi, or really 0.4 of a psi vacuum, starting a little bit less here, maybe minus 0.3 there, going all the way to minus 0.4 this vacuum. So what does vacuum mean? Why am I looking at this? A quick explanation is I'm expecting this engine to pull nearly zero vacuum, especially with a carburetor this big. The more vacuum I pull, the more of a restriction that the carburetor or the inlet's posing to the engine. So if you've got a significant restriction on the inlet, it's obviously going to restrict the power. So looking at this, we went and looking at the engine a little bit more, and we found some basics that we could have set up a little bit better, which is the throttle cable. So it wasn't adjusted 100%, so we're going to give it another run now with the throttle readjusted. And another thing I want to show you guys is this throttle bracket. So we'll go full throttle and you guys look at the flex in there. Okay, so it is flexing here, so it should be a more sturdy bracket. You can see that I can move it with my hand, and you can also see here that I can pull just probably a little bit more throttle myself. So we are getting to probably 80-90% throttle, but not quite 100%. So we've just adjusted it so it gets almost 100%. And let's see the power difference with this adjustment. Now I'm not really expecting a big difference, only because this is already a fairly big carburetor, being 770 CFM, for the power that we're making at the wheels. So if it's 260 or so horsepower at the wheels, probably at the engine we're somewhere near 300, which this carburetor will easily do. So let's give it another power run and see what we get. After cable adjustments, this is our power run. We did gain that slight bit of extra power. Yes, it's not much, but again, we weren't expecting much of a gain because the carburetor is already large enough for this engine. An interesting observation is when the throttle's pulled that far, our mixture change here, you can see the red being before, the blue being after, so we're somewhere around 13:1 air fuel ratio. Again, I would probably want to try a little bit richer mixtures, especially on the primary barrel, to fix up this lean spot. Not lean spot, but the engine would probably like a little bit more fuel earlier on in the rev range there, where we're starting around this 2,500 to 3,500 area, where the secondaries are coming in, and that should make the transition smoother as well. After adjustments to ignition timing, what's happening? Well, blue line is my before line, and my purple line is the after, with extra 2.5 degrees ignition timing. So I'm obviously going backwards here, so I didn't feel the need to do a full power run, so I stopped the power run at about 4,200, 4,300. And I might now try actually less timing, see if the engine picks up power, because originally she was around 28-30 degrees total timing, which I thought she might maybe like a bit more, but obviously doesn't. And this is where dyno tuning is great. You can see what the engine actually likes, and you know, where you need to go with your changes. And sometimes you got to make a move, and it can be positive or negative. At least if you make a move and it seems to be going backwards, now you try the opposite and see how the engine reacts. So let's go do that now. Timing adjustments, take 2, so less timing. This time I've got approximately 2.5 degrees less than what the car had originally. Let's see how the power responds. Now I don't need somebody or pay attention to engine knocking this time, because it didn't knock even with the additional timing in it. So where I'm 4 degrees back from that timing figure, it's definitely not going to knock, and if it makes even the same power, it's going to be much safer. So let's run and find out. Okay, we have ended up roughly where we were, so I might actually keep this ignition timing because it is going to be safer on the engine. So I've ended up 263, we were at 265, it's down about 2 horsepower. It's not a big power engine, we're not going to miss the 2 horsepower. It's better to have that safety in it in case we pick up a bad batch of fuel or the motor's running hot one day, etc., where we need that extra safety. Yeah, I think this is going to be the setting. I'm going to keep this and yeah, lock the distributor up where it is now. Other observations from this engine so we can all learn. Vacuum advance. It's this unit here on the side of the distributor. I don't know how good the camera's getting it, but there it is. This is where a vacuum line connects, and that vacuum line goes to under the carburetor here to this point. What that does is it allows extra advance while you're cruising, while the carburetor's pulling a bit of vacuum on the part throttle. So that additional advance gives us better fuel economy, because by advancing it more at that part throttle, we're going to pick up some power for the given throttle setting. For instance, if we were making 15 horsepower, we'd say 5% throttle at that RPM. We might go to 18 or 20 horsepower, so we've got extra 10, 20, sometimes 30% extra power at that part load. So what that would mean is then we can roll back on the throttle back to our 15 horsepower, if that's all the power that's needed to maintain that cruise speed. But we're doing it with less throttle now, so it is going to end up with better economy. The other advantages in having that running is we're going to probably get a sharper feeling engine at part throttle, because we've got the advance that's correct for that condition. Because you got to remember, when we're not running vacuum advance and we're running fixed timing, that fixed timing is the correct timing for the engine when it's under full throttle. So it's not necessarily the correct timing for the engine at part throttle. So having this vacuum advance hooked up gives us timing more close to what the engine would require under part throttle, because there's not as much load on the engine at part throttle. Engines like more timing at that point, and it is going to allow us to vary the timing to suit both of those conditions, full throttle and part throttle, by having that hooked up. Well, I think that's about it from this one for today, so let's wrap it up. Okay guys, I think that's it from the dyno on the VK for today. We were able to do a checkup, see where the car's shortcomings were, how we could improve it. We did try timing to find out that we're at least somewhere near the correct position for timing as the car drove in. We did retard back a little bit from there to err more on the side of safety and sacrifice 1.5 horsepower, which was a compromise or a trade that we were willing to make. Next move on this car is probably going to be the vacuum advance, hooking that up and getting that going, and also correcting the mixtures on the carburetor. So I would like to add a little bit more fuel to the primary, which will add to my overall fueling. And after I've added some to primary to keep the overall the same, I might remove a little bit from the secondary so my total fuel remains the same. But again, that's something that I need the car back here for, to experiment with, to see what the car likes, to get the tune up as good as we can. Okay, so if you've liked this video, give us a like. If you didn't like it, give us a thumbs down and let us know what we've done wrong. And if you're into this type of thing, you'd like to see some more of this, subscribe, and we've got more videos coming.